Sorry, close. Thank you for joining us. We're just waiting for our online participants to be able to connect. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today and prioritizing attending this side event on human rights in Ethiopia. I want to thank the co-sponsors of today's event, the Organization for Justice and Accountability in the Horn of Africa, Health Professionals Network for Tigray, Oromo Legacy Leadership and Advocacy Association, Gender Empowerment Movement Tigray, the Global Center for Responsibility to Protect, Legal Action Worldwide, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch. Please note that some of our panelists will be joining online due to security concerns, as well as financial limitations on travel to Geneva. My name is Payal Shah, and I'm the Director of Research, Legal, and Advocacy at Physicians for Human Rights. Physicians for Human Rights brings together the tools of science, medicine, public health, and human rights to document health and human rights violations around the world and to use this rigorous evidence to advocate for humanitarian relief, justice, and accountability. PHR has worked with the Organization for Justice and Accountability in the Horn of Africa, Health Professionals Network for Tigray, and other partners in Ethiopia since 2021 to support health professionals and human rights defenders to document human rights violations occurring as part of the conflicts in Tigray, Amhara, Afar, and Oromia regions. We come together at a critical time for human rights in Ethiopia, when UN publicly available documentation has largely lapsed, but violations are still ongoing. In 2023, the Human Rights Council allowed the mandate of the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia to lapse, citing in bilateral discussions that transitional justice was the best path forward. Now, 3 years later, advocates report a lack of meaningful survivor-centered advances in transitional justice for atrocities that occurred in Tigray, which has fueled impunity and left tensions unresolved. In addition, across several regions of Ethiopia, including Tigray, as well as Amhara, Afar, and Oromia, numerous groups have documented ongoing violations of human rights arising from continued violence, including drone strikes, heavy fighting, and extrajudicial killing. PHR and our partners continue to receive reports of renewed and ongoing fighting and the risk of further grave violations in Tigray, Amhara, and Oromia regions, including conflict-related sexual violence and reproductive violence. There are also other signals of potential renewed conflict, such as reports of a recent made by Tigray regional authorities to force conscription in Tigray into the TPLF and punish dissent. Health professionals in Tigray report to PHR and OJA that they have a persistent fear and an overwhelming sense of helplessness about the prospect of renewed fighting. The Tigray Regional Health Bureau has issued an urgent appeal, as they have run out of funding for essential services as national budget allocations have not been released to the region. They have not been able to pay health worker salaries since January and are also facing a critical shortage of both medical supplies and fuel. With limited supplies and no assurance of resupply, compounded by shrinking global aid allocations for global health, they are increasingly forced to withhold non-emergency care. And the current pattern we see mirror what has been documented by PHR and our partners between 2020 and 2024. PHR and OJA's August 2023 report, Broken Promises, found that sexual violence in Tigray was used as a tactic during active conflict from November 2020 to November 2022 and has continued after the signing of the Cessation of Hostilities Agreement. Our report, You Will Never Be Able to Give Birth, published in July 2025, concluded that widespread, systematic, and deliberate conflict-related sexual violence was committed in Tigray, Amhara, and Afar regions, and reproductive violence was committed in Tigray. In this report, healthcare workers shared evidence of perpetrators' intent to prevent future Tigrayan births. To share an account from a nurse in Tigray, she shares, "They inserted paper with written letters into the woman's vagina, causing damage. We have seen this in more than one client. The letters found in their vagina stated a plan for revenge, aiming to destroy the Tigrayan people. Many foreign objects, such as stones, and more than 10 nails were found in their uterus. Healthcare workers also reported multiple perpetrator rape in 91% of surveys. Medical records showed a median of 3 perpetrators per incident, and 69% of healthcare workers reported survivors experiencing violence in groups. Healthcare workers also documented the medical and psychological consequences of sexual and reproductive violence, including 10% of survivors whose medical records showed that they tested positive for pregnancy after sexual violence, and 17% of medical records showed survivors testing positive for HIV. And this is in a country where the national average of HIV is 0.09%. Importantly, for our discussion today, our 2025 report also found the failure to meaningfully respond to the crimes committed in Tigray has led to a spread of atrocities, including conflict-related sexual violence to Amhara and Afar regions in Ethiopia. Today, across Ethiopia's conflict-affected regions, survivors continue to need complex and long-term health care to address the physical and mental health impacts of conflict-related sexual and reproductive violence. Yet the current escalation of violence threatens access to health care at a critical time when justice and accountability for survivors remains out of reach. Our panelists today will provide us with critical insights into what is happening now in Ethiopia and identify actionable solutions for a way forward. I'll introduce the panelists and then we will turn to each them. The first panelist is Batseba Seifu with Gender Empowerment Movement Tigray. She's the founder and executive director of Gender Empowerment Movement Tigray, which is a movement for the social, economic, and political empowerment of women and girls in Tigray. Our second panelist will be Sena Jimjimo from Aroma Legacy Leadership and Advocacy Organization. She's the communications director for the United Women of the Horn and the founder of OLA. Dr. Samara will join us online from the Organization of Justice and Accountability in the Horn of Africa. They are also a healthcare worker in Ethiopia, an expert in human rights documentation, and a conflict-related sexual violence researcher. Dr. Abraha Gebre-Igzaber is from Health Professionals Network for Tigray. Dr. Abraha is the current chief clinical director of a hospital in Tigray and a practicing pediatrician and neurologist with research expertise in neurodevelopmental conditions and the impact of Tigray's war on children, mothers, and healthcare, quality of care, and healthcare governance. And finally, we have Ivy Shuchello, who is the legal advisor from Legal Action Worldwide. So I'll first turn to Batseba online. GEM has been closely following the situation facing Tigrayan civilians after the formal end of large-scale hostilities in November 2022. Could you share what you see as the most pressing human rights and humanitarian concerns today, particularly in relation to displacement, access to services, security, and accountability? I think we can't hear. Yeah, we can't hear, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for your question, and I hope I will answer your questions throughout my remarks. Also, I want to say thank you to all of the co-organizing partners for convening this timely, important conversation, and also to welcome our esteemed guests. You have introduced me, so I won't repeat the introduction, but I want to say that today I'm here to share a message that is both urgent and painful. For millions of Tigrayans, the suffering after the Pretoria Peace Agreement has not really ended. The reality on the ground stands at a stark contrast to the narrative that portrays Tigray as only a post-war region. The reality is that large parts of Tigray remain under the forceful, unconstitutional occupation by Eritrean and Amhara forces. As a result, large masses of Tigrayans remain forcefully displaced from their homes, their farms, their communities. close to 4 years since the signing of the Pretoria Peace Agreement, but still unable to return to their homes safely. Families and individuals who already endured genocidal war, weaponized starvation, conflict-related sexual violence, deliberate destruction of their livelihoods, continue to live in severely harsh displacement sites with zero certainty about their future prospects. In September 2025, we lost 2 years old Naud. Naud was killed by a hyena in an IDP camp in Mekelle, Tigray. This was not simply a tragic incident, rather a consequence of years of neglect and abandonment. We also work with women who continue to suffer severe reproductive health complications from conflict-related sexual violence, worsened by harsh conditions in displacement camps. While all of this is happening, the Ethiopian government instituted a quote-unquote zero IDP policy, and that's for 2026. Durable solutions for displaced populations are critical. They necessitate returns that are voluntary, safe, dignified, informed. Displacements cannot be politicized as a result of quote-unquote zero IDP policies, neither by returning displaced Tigrayans while forces that continue to commit ethnic cleansing, what we victims call genocide, remains intact. The Pretoria Agreement requires the restoration of essential services, among other provisions. Instead, the Ethiopian government has restricted budgetary allocations and fuel to Tigray, in essence, continuing a functional blockade. It's heartbreaking to hear of pregnant women in Tigray traveling to clinics using donkeys, putting their lives at risk because of the restrictions on fuel because of this blockade. Children are unable to attend their education because teachers have not been paid salaries because of this blockade. The whole population is currently under collective punishment, denied even to withdraw money from their own bank accounts because of this blockade. Women and girls continue to bear a disproportionate share of the consequences of this cruelty. Existing gender inequalities are deepened, and women and girls are at heightened risks of violence, further poverty, displacement, exclusion. Survivors of conflict-related sexual violence continue to live with physical injuries, trauma, stigma, economic hardship, restricted access to critical services. For many survivors, and for many of us Tigrayans, peace remains a distant, elusive dream. As recently as June 2026, drone strikes again threatened civilian lives. Communities that survived atrocities continue to live in fear. A civilian, we lost a civilian. He was already killed in previous strikes earlier this very year. Nearly 3 years after the termination of the decree, victims continue to ask a simple, but indeed a critical question. If the world knows, if all of us know what happened in Tigray, why has nobody been held accountable for the tragic crimes committed? At the same time, human rights concerns within Tigray by the current regime in Tigray must not be ignored. Lack of justice for femicide, including but not limited to the brutal murder of Zawdu Haftu in Mekelle, forced conscriptions, arbitrary arrests, harassment of journalists, restrictions on freedom of expression, intimidation of political opponents have raised major concerns. Just this month, 76 years old, energetic, vibrant, bold Mama Haza was detained for 2 days for expressing criticism. Even after the court ordered her release, she was held an extra day because the police refused her release. For Tigray, justice has been both delayed and denied. Fear continues to hang over our people. The survivors' quests remain critical. The restoration of essential services, sustainable peace, safe return of IDPs and refugees, protection of human rights, justice, accountability. Today, I urge, even beg, all member states and the international community to positively respond in a survivor-centered manner. Thank you very, very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Batseba, for sharing about the situation in Tigray and indeed posing that really critical question. If the world knows what happened in Tigray, why has no one been held accountable? I now want to turn to the situation in Oromia, which has also been experiencing human rights violations that also even predate the Tigray conflict. Sena, can you tell me a bit about the work that Ola has been doing and what you've documented recently in terms of human rights violations?
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, okay, I think it's on. Your Excellencies, delegate, colleagues, and human rights defenders. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this side event, 60-second session of Human Rights Council. I'm here to highlight the urgent and deeply concerning human rights situation in Oromia region of Ethiopia, a crisis that continues to unfold with far too little information from the international community. For years, communities across Oromia have endured widespread and systematic violence under both the current and previous regimes. Since late 2018, civilians have faced extrajudiciary killing, arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearance, collective punishment for nearly 7 years continues. The entire village has been wiped out without anybody known. Children have been forced into military conspiracy to fight group the government labeled as terrorists, including the OLA, and to fight against the northern invasion. This is in addition to a distraction carried out under Corridor Project, land acquisition disguised as development, and deliberate cultivation of mistrust between communities based on ethnic and religion line. While the situation in the northern Ethiopia have received some level of international attention, the situation in Oromia have home to more than half of Ethiopian population have remained largely invisible. Limited access, absence of reliable information have allowed the government to act with little oversight, leaving Oromos defenseless. This silence has enabled the government to treat Oromia and its people at its own domain, assuming no one will speak about their suffering. The lack of scrutiny has only emboldened this attitude, reinforcing the belief that no meaningful pressure will be applied, even as Oromo life continue to be taken with total impunity. Long before the conflict, ethnic cleansing in Tigray in 2020, Oromia was already under de facto state of emergency, followed by an official state of emergency with the killing of Hachalu Hundessa. While the world focused in northern conflict, Oromos have lived under constant terror, not only from regional and federal forces, but from Fano militias trained and deployed to target Oromo civilians under the slogan of drying the pond to kill the fish. Excellencies, by the time the conflict erupted in Amhara region in 2023, Oromia have already endured 5 years of continuous violence. Yet during this year, there's only one full report that was published in 2019. That was the same year the Prime Minister received the Nobel Peace Prizes. The constraint of lack of information from Oromia speaks its volume. Our report that came out this year, 2025, shows this pattern have continued. Just about 2 weeks ago, in areas such as Sero, Heban, and City, where a lot of people have been killed, it shows that the government have using its resource to divide and kill people. The only report that came out recently in 2024, Reuters report, shows how government divide, terrorize Oromos under the pretext of security. While too little attention has been given to Oromia, we acknowledged recently that organizations have begun to talk about. Yet, despite this effort, impunity remains. This compounded by absence of human rights monitoring organizations, service as restricted to media, limited humanitarian accesses, targeting civilians, targeting individuals who attempt to document or speak about them. Therefore, today, respectfully urge Human Rights Council and international community, one, expand independent investigation and monitoring mechanism and ensure full UN special procedure across Oromia and other regions. Two, guarantee civilian protection, including displaced minority communities, human right defense limitation. Number three, we ask this council apply pressure for genuine political dialogue to end the violences across the country. Number four, we ask that ensure unhindered humanitarian accesses, end child force conspiracy to military, and force displacement in the name of investment. The people of Oromia are not only asking for special treatment, they are asking for the same fundamental right and protection that Council is mandated to uphold. They are asking for peace, dignity, justice, and accountability for any casualty they face, and they are faced an ability to remain in their land and rebuild their life. Finally, silence, inaction, failure to recognize the situation in Oromia would only continue to embolden the perpetrator and allow the government to portray Oromia as stable. Today, Allah calls on the Council to stand firmly with the victims and survivors across Ethiopia to ensure their suffering is neither ignored or forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sana, for sharing what's happening in Oromia and your powerful call for the Council and member states to end the silence on the human rights violations occurring there. I want to turn now online to Dr. Samara. Based on OJA's recent documentation in the Amhara region, what patterns are you seeing in attacks on the healthcare system? And what do these patterns suggest about the scale, intent, and impact of harms to civilians? Can you also speak to how these attacks are affecting vulnerable groups, including patients, displaced communities, health workers, women, children, older persons, and people with disabilities?
Thank you, Payal. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Payal, again for the critical question, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak and also for guiding this event. Since my organization and me, we all are introduced well. So I'll directly answer your question regarding what your organization, what we are documenting and also seeing in Ethiopia specific to Amhara. So as OJA, our ongoing monitoring captures a deeply concerning and undeniable reality. We are witnessing a systematic, multi-layered assault on human rights and a direct assault on the fundamental right to health. Our recent monitoring work highlights the staggering and compounding scales of this emergency. So just only this year, 2026, between January and May 2026, we recorded like 131 different total incidents of violence across 6 high-risk regions that we monitor in Ethiopia. Out of those, 21 of them were this direct attack on healthcare, and the vast majority of them, or those atrocities, have occurred precisely in Amhara region that we are speaking now. I think let me be entirely clear. The pattern we see shows that those things that we are going to speak now, they are not an isolated instance of an accident or collateral damage. They represent the deliberate, targeted campaigns that strikes at every single levels of the health system. What you are seeing today directly mirrors also the harrowing violence documented during the heights of the northern Ethiopia conflict that started in 2020, that continued until 2022. Yeah, I lived through it in Tigray. I was there. That time, like many of my own colleagues were killed and tortured, raped, simply because they were found at the health facility to provide the care. I still have this image that always flashes back to my memory, those clinics and hospitals that I documented, which was usually to be a military camp, tortures, and left destroyed that we have in our archive. So speaking of that, like years later, most have still not rebuilt, leaving the community entirely cut off from this basic medical service. So going back to Amhara, sometimes like when I see the data, it seems like everything is like happening again. Our recent monitoring in Amhara region and other regions that we label as a risk, the documentation shows like a definite pattern what was happening by then. One thing is physical attack and infrastructure, as well as in transportation. Hospitals, clinics are being destroyed, damaged, forcibly also occupied, and hit by drones, even medical transport being targeted. This was exactly that we were speaking by then, earlier into 2020. This year, just only in 2026, across the monitoring regions, like 4 more facilities have been wiped out, left entirely unable to provide a single service to the community. To just raise one example, the incident in February 11 this year, the clash in southern border, which is in Amhara, completely destroyed the regional health department, incinerated its supplies warehouse and blast the 2 ambulances. So when you destroy a warehouse and an ambulance, you are not just attacking the building, you are condemning a patient to die. The other thing that is repeating itself is the campaign against healthcare workers. Today, healthcare professionals are like being terrorized in their clinics, at public space, at their home, everywhere. This year, we have lost like really documented 9 health workers' deaths, while dozens more have been injured, arrested, and kidnapped. The danger also reaches everywhere, even to the university schools, out of those, even out of any areas, out of an active conflict. Days before, like in May 30, 2026, we documented a bomb blast at the University of Gondar, College of Health Science, that killed 3 students and also wounded 30. So this is the deliberate strategy to instill fear. When professionals are terrified, they stop reporting the horror they see. Once healthcare professionals were like a dominant source of information and also supporters of the documentation work in OJA. Today, extracting inaccurate information from care provider has become incredibly difficult, as fear silences the very people who should be our witnesses. The other thing that's documented and also repeating itself in Amhara is like the essential medicines and also equipments have been systematically stripped away under looting. But also the crisis is severely worsened by structural blockage. This is not only also happening in Amhara, it's also happening in other regions like Tigray. We are seeing a critical lack of fields, recent pause of federal support, and total halting of the civil servants' salary in regions like Tigray. Imagine the reality on the ground. Again, the dedicated healthcare workers are being left to try to save lives without absolutely no supplies, without even an income to feed their own families. So I think speaking of the impact on the vulnerable groups, when infrastructures are ruined, workers are killed, and supplies are choked off, the consequences are catastrophic, and especially for those exact population. Simply, a destroyed clinic means like complete absence of life-saving care. So furthermore, beyond that, also the psychological toll is devastating. Healthcare workers that we speak, mainly from the Amhara region, are even terrified to support or report for duty. Even like the local community that we speak, they are too traumatized and they are too reluctant to seek the care, because we are talking about the hospitals are like more severe and targets of the attack. So as OJA, we all know and also understand the protection of healthcare is not an optional. It's an urgent international humanitarian low priority. So we call to the completing parties for protection for healthcare professionals, patients, and unhindered access to health services for the affected community. And we call the international community, including the Human Rights Council, an impartial investigation of the attacks of the healthcare, accountability for the perpetrators. Also, should continue to closely monitor the situation, support independent documentation, and ensure that attacks on health do not continue with impunity. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samara, for sharing how the healthcare sector has been targeted during attacks in Amhara, even up until the recent months, and what this has meant for civilians who are really bearing the highest price of impunity for attacks as they then replicate across regions. I'd like to turn to Dr. Abraha online. As a clinician, what is the current status of healthcare in northern Ethiopia? And what are the most urgent barriers preventing healthcare delivery where you are right now? What are the concrete steps that need to be taken to restore essential services?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak up. Along with the press release calling for urgent action, it's a humanitarian crisis, as stipulated for urgent action to address the humanitarian crisis, as stipulated by the Health Professional Network for Tigray, along with coalition of physicians, human rights, and humanitarian organizations. I would like to respond to the.
Sorry, maybe we can turn off the video because I think there's a connection. Yeah.
As a system in despair, I would discuss care in northern Ethiopia as that's calling for responsibility. This is coming less in volume and variety, that's shrinking. Infrastructure improvement remains extremely limited. The fuel crisis has paralyzed patient visit to healthcare facilities. In fact, also has compromised staff movement to the healthcare facilities and to home, and on top of compromising their daily living. The healthcare workers' welfare remains at stake with interrupted salaries and duty pays, causing temporary suspension of services in various hospitals, leaving the vulnerable without advocates, on top of the psychological distress related with failure to respond to patient demands optimally. We didn't observe so much response and urgency attending such issues. In fact, again, hiding update information about the context and international colleagues, on top of partners that would keep them reconnecting with us after the cessation of the hostilities and silencing the guns between 2020 to 2022. Over subsequent years, we had some coming back partners, international colleagues, national trainees for our very reputable is declining and falling back. International colleagues are having a vacuum of information and are hesitating to visit us, to partner as usual or positively and building. All in all, this stage shall be used to urging responsible stakeholders, humanitarian actors, and the global community to restore drug supply chains in a sustainable and secure manner. The fuel shall be settled and shall be secured very well to protect the vulnerable, to offer services for the mothers, the infants, and the general population. Again, the healthcare workers need to be supported and protected. Their welfare shall be enhanced, strengthening humanitarian response and embracing peace and stability is very important at this very stage. I thank you very much for the opportunity, and I thank you very much also for advocating for those whose voices are not so well heard.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abraha. And I think you're really painting a clear picture of the ways in which attacks on health, the insecurity that was already created in Tigray and the health needs of civilians, and then also the lack of funding and resources are coming together to lead to barriers for civilians and the need for a more coordinated response. So thank you so much for sharing that. Ivy, I want to turn to you now and ask a bit if you could share about how survivors from the war in Tigray from 2020 to 2022 have repeatedly expressed their desire for accountability and justice for the violations that they faced. As a lawyer working with these communities, can you share more about survivors' experiences pursuing justice, both domestically and internationally? And what is the role needed from member states and OHCHR to support monitoring, reporting, and accountability, including in relation to laws, litigation, and broader efforts for accountability?
Certainly. Thanks, Val. So our legal action worldwide, accountability is one of our thematic areas, and we've made active steps towards accountability efforts in Ethiopia and in Tigray. So this has been evidenced by two cases that we filed before. Number one, the African Commission, where we sought state responsibility under the African Charter, and the case is ongoing and we await a decision. This is a 2022 case that was filed. Subsequently, in 2024, we filed a universal jurisdiction case on individual criminal liability in Germany before the German prosecutors. Unfortunately, our case seeking the prosecution of 11 persons of interest from the ENDF and the EDF was rejected by the German prosecutor. We've watched transitional justice become a phrase repeated in communiques, excuse me, without becoming a process people can see. The UN's ICRI's mandate has been lapsed and has not been renewed, and the council shifted towards technical assistance and track instead of an independent investigation. So impunity is not just a moral failure, it's fueling the next round of violence. And we're seeing it now spread towards Oromia, we're seeing it spread towards Amhara. Whatever formal label, the practical result has been the same. Very few perpetrators of documented violations on any side have faced real consequences. As I'll just echo what some of my other panelists have said in terms of the lack of reporting. When OHCHR and other UN agencies go quiet on the crisis, the silence doesn't read as neutral. It's merely like nothing is happening here. And things are happening, as we're seeing from doctors, we're seeing from CSOs on the ground. People are being killed. Women are facing conflict-related sexual violence at an all-time high. And when reporting stops or slows down, donor attention stops, media coverage dries up, accountability efforts lose momentum. Systematic public reporting isn't paperwork. It's one of the main tools that keeps a crisis visible to the people who can act on it. So more precisely, as we look at what we can do here in Geneva as in the Human Rights Council, as member states, looking into how we can support the reporting, support accountability efforts. We've talked about attacks on aid workers. Protection of humanity and the health of humanitarian aid workers cannot be an afterthought in this conversation. The violations of international humanitarian law and in many cases meet the threshold of war crimes and crimes against humanity. So some of these things, some of these concerns have to be part of our dialogue and our discussions here in Geneva and with the OHCHR. Funding as well. We have seen funding being quite, dwindle the past years since the war began and the conflict was ongoing, and the humanitarian response in the region has been severely affected with states funding cut and the budgetary decisions they're making in terms of political affiliations. So what can we do here as a way forward? What can member states do? What can civil society do? Number one, establishment or renewing of an independent investigative mandate that can be able to report. As I said, without data, without us knowing what is ongoing, the reporting gap is causing a big reporting stops and slows the donor attention, media coverage, meaning accountability momentum is non-existent. And not only establishing and renewing it, we need funding for said mandates. Another thing, secondly, is ensuring that we keep Ethiopia on the Council's agenda, particularly item number 2, where we can be able to find out the ongoing violations, as you're seeing here. This is being reported by civil society. Access to Tigray, to Oromia, and Amhara is minimal. And number 3, what tools can state use to advance accountability? We have seen severally, especially in law, at Legal Action Worldwide, with our work on accountability and individual criminal liability, is a lot of states can and have the opportunity to use universal jurisdiction to their benefit, as well as many states have ratified and signed the Geneva Conventions. So we cannot await for external mechanisms while we already have the tools before us to advance accountability efforts. I'd like to thank the panel, and I'd like to thank you all once again for really taking into consideration and to prioritizing this discussion.
Thank you so much, Ivy. I think you've really painted a clear picture of the silence that's surrounding the human rights violations that are occurring across Ethiopia and what this means as we think about justice for those individuals who have suffered violations. I want to open the floor for questions and see if anyone has questions from the audience. And I know, WHO, you had wanted to intervene. Yeah.
It's not a question. First of all, I really would like to thank the panel for this enriching discussion and particularly the role that the NGOs are playing on the ground in terms of not only providing services, but also documenting these kind of possible attacks. I just would like to highlight a little bit of the work that WHO is doing, but also to take this opportunity as a call for support. At the moment, WHO has a surveillance system to document attacks on healthcare, and this surveillance system was established back in December 2017. For the moment, the data that we have covers 27 countries. Ethiopia is not one of them, and perhaps it's just an opportunity to clarify that the selection of countries has nothing to do with any specific thing except some operational realities. In a way, do we have the capacity on the ground to collect data? Do we have the WHO capacity to do a verification of such attacks, and then all the needed support to put these data on the system and to have them in the public dashboard that accessible to everyone, which basically records the minimum set of data about the attacks, the type of attacks, and in the countries where these attacks are taking place. Some issues related to the, or features, if you want, related to our system in a way that no matter who is reporting attack, the verification has to be centralized within WHO. And this gives the neutrality and the independency of the type of data that we have. And it's really a call for the support of all partners, including NGOs that are working on the ground, to join hands and help us in expanding the coverage of the system. We do have a plan to expand the coverage of the system to include 50 more countries, but with the current capacities that we have, it's pretty much limited. We really would rely on the support of the different partners, including NGOs. So if there are interest, if NGOs are available, we would like to have discussion to see how we can build on their support to have such incidents being reported. And of course, it will have to go through the verification system that we have in place, which again, centralized within WHO. This really will help us to have a more clear picture on the type of attack, but also to put efforts in terms of analyzing them for patterns, the trends, and to inform all the measures that are needed for prevention, operational readiness, efforts to continue the provision of services, and of course to support any accountability measures that would need to be taken by other organizations. So thank you so much. It's really helpful to understand what's going on, but we really would like the support from each one. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you as well for the commitment to verifying and trying to publicize the attacks as they are arising. And we certainly are hearing from civil society of these ongoing attacks and the need for this to be reflected in UN documentation, which currently is unfortunately quite silent on these issues. I want to see if there are any other questions. Yep.
Raise the flag, but the flag is lost, but I'm representing the European Union. And I just wanted to briefly say thank you for organizing this event and shedding a light on Ethiopia that indeed is not on the agenda of the Council as such. This is why the European Union has been leading on a joint statement twice a year in the spring and autumn sessions of the Council to indeed bring some attention to the human rights situation in the country and to the lack of accountability and progress on the transitional justice agenda. Also at the Council this session last week, we included Ethiopia in our item 2 statement and in particular discussed the general elections that took place and called on all stakeholders to uphold human rights across the country and make progress on justice and accountability for all victims and survivors of grave human rights violations and abuses. So I also wanted to take the opportunity to really thank the speakers for sharing their testimonies and just want to recognize your work for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or interventions from the floor? Since we do have a few more minutes, I did want to ask maybe if some of the panelists in the room could share how the results of the recent national election have created opportunities or challenges for documentation, justice, or accountability.
In the case of Oromia, the national election, where the government predominantly like to portray that it is where the major election took place, because Tigray and Amhara region. The fact of the matter is Oromia is a dark hole where a lot of international community don't have an access or information, even though Oromia is what the government like to rely as a constituency. Just one example that is that is forced election where individuals are forced to elect, and to elect in Ethiopia you have to have an ink in your color in your finger, and if you are not found with the color, they remove in certain area. They have removed. We have information that they've removed and nailed. Interestingly, on the other side, in the evening, if the armed group cut you with your finger, mark that election, that you lose your hand. So, and this is the situation in Oromia. If you don't vote, if you didn't vote, then you face the government, and if you do vote, you face the armed group. And the government used election just for a mandate. So we really do not believe and have not seen evidence that the election in any way that was meaningfully independent and credible, more of just a rubber stamp that the government like to use. And again, we urge, using this opportunity, that the absence of data have enabled the international community to see Oromia as stable, but Oromia is a boiling spot, have been and continue to be.
Ivy, do you have anything to add? No? Okay. And sharing their stories. Your message is resounding, despite the robust record and recent history, as well as ongoing reports of serious human rights violations documented in Ethiopia and ongoing evidence of abuses, impunity, and silence. It's continued to be the norm that they're allowed to continue without any consequences. We've heard some powerful messages today about the devastating suffering civilians are experiencing as the result of our collective failure to ensure justice and prevent future atrocities. Our panelists have also identified some concrete solutions that I'd like to highlight in our closing. First and foremost, international and regional actors must push for Ethiopia, Eritrea, and regional actors and militias to stop the violence and to de-escalate. Here in Geneva, we're also calling on members of the Human Rights Council to urge consistent and transparent human rights monitoring of the situation in Ethiopia, including regular public reporting by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the World Health Organization, as well as public release of these findings of the reports to avoid silence around an ongoing human rights crisis. We also call for the Council members to support the resumption of impartial, independent documentation and investigation of serious human rights violations and atrocity crimes that have occurred in Ethiopia, including the preservation of evidence of serious crimes under international law, by reestablishing international and regional investigative mandates to monitor and document human rights violations. Member states should also call for special procedures to continue to prioritize monitoring human rights violations in Ethiopia, including conflict-related gender-based violence and violations of the rights to life and health and other harms. We also urge member states to support meaningful justice and accountability and prevent impunity for these violations and ensure reparations for survivors. This can include through international processes as well as through universal jurisdiction. Most urgently, provision of humanitarian aid and healthcare must be delivered immediately to affected communities, many of whom have already experienced egregious acts of violence and now risk future grave harm. Thank you all for your time today.